Good afternoon, everyone. So we just concluded the inaugural meeting of the new U.S.-Japan Economic Consultative Committee, otherwise known as the EPCC, or EPIC. Secretary Raimondo and I were very glad to welcome our colleagues here to Washington today. Foreign Minister Hayashi and I saw each other just a few weeks ago in Bali for the G20, and then in Tokyo, where I had the opportunity to convey the profound sympathy and sorrow of the American people to the people of Japan after the assassination of Prime Minister Abe. As you may know, the EPCC was a product of President Biden and Prime Minister Kishida's meeting in January, their first major talk after the Prime Minister took office last fall. They agreed that the U.S.-Japan alliance has never been stronger or more necessary, and that our countries should deepen our cooperation to strengthen the rules-based economic order, to address urgent challenges facing our workers, our businesses, people, and accelerate open, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. Today's first meeting of the EPCC was, I think it's fair to say, a resounding success. Productive, substantive, directly connected to issues that matter in our people's lives and in their futures. We discussed building resilient supply chains after the COVID-19 pandemic revealed just how fragile they are. We addressed emerging technologies, which bring so much promise of opportunity, but also risks to national security, human rights, consumer health and safety, intellectual property. We talked about Moscow's war on Ukraine. Our countries are working closely to impose costs on Russia so that President Putin will end the war and address, of course, in the meantime, food and fuel prices worldwide that have been spiked in part because of Russia's aggression. We discussed development finance and the problem of opaque lending practices that can weigh down countries with unsustainable debt. And we addressed the People's Republic of China and how its coercive economic practices go against an open, inclusive, rules-based international economic order that gives all countries a chance to participate, to compete, and to grow. Japan and the United States believe in a global economy where all countries hold themselves to norms, to standards, to practices that allow people, ideas, goods, capital to move freely, where disputes are resolved swiftly, peacefully, openly, and where trade and commerce support workers, raise incomes, protect the environment, and create opportunity for as many people as possible. The EPCC is the latest addition to an ever-growing partnership with Japan. A few months ago in Tokyo, our two countries joined 12 others to launch the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework to support a stronger, fair, more resilient economy across the region. Our countries work together through the Quad with India and Australia on issues from global health to the climate crisis to infrastructure. We cooperate through the OECD to tackle bribery and corruption, through the Global Action Plan to fight COVID-19, through the new Mineral Security Partnership to bolster critical mineral supply chains. And beyond all of these different initiatives and fora, the bilateral relationship between Japan and the United States encompasses just about every issue we face, from protecting our national security to defending human rights to advancing our vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific region. The work that we did today, making clear together that our economic security is a vital component of our overall national security and well-being, I think just underscores the importance and the breadth and depth of our partnership. We are deeply grateful for our alliance with Japan. It stretches back decades, sustained by cherished ties of family and friendship between our peoples. The work we did here today reflects the strength of that partnership, but also, importantly, carries it forward. On a separate note, earlier today, I spoke with Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov. We had a frank and direct conversation. I pressed the Kremlin to accept the substantial proposal that we put forth on the release of Paul Whelan and Brittany Griner. I also emphasized that the world expects Russia to fulfill its commitments under the deal it reached with Ukraine, Turkey, and the United Nations on grain shipments from Ukraine. Ambassador Brink, our ambassador to Ukraine, was in Odessa this morning She confirmed that the ships are loaded and ready to go. It is important and vital that Russia make good on the commitments it's made to the world. As I made clear, we're looking to see that move forward as soon as possible. I also made clear to Foreign Minister Lavrov that in light of recent statements coming from the Kremlin about their plans to proceed with the further annexation of Ukrainian territory, indeed, the Foreign Minister's own words about replacing a democratically elected Ukrainian government as well as being part of their ongoing plans, those plans would never be accepted. The world will not recognize annexations. We will impose additional significant costs on Russia if it moves forward with its plans. We'll also continue to stand with Ukraine, support its ability to defend itself, impose costs on Russia until it ends its aggression. We continue to coordinate closely with allies and partners, including very closely with Japan, to support Ukraine and to hold Moscow to account. And as always, we're prepared to work with Ukraine and others to support any meaningful diplomatic efforts to end the war, to end the aggression. So, with that, let me just thank my colleagues so much for an incredibly productive meeting and for designing together the way ahead and to make sure that the EPPC really is an epic achievement between our countries. Thank you. Yogi.
Thank you. それでは私の方から、今回は外務大臣として初めてのワシントン DC 訪問になりました。まず、安倍元総理のご逝去に際しまして、バイデン大統領、そしてブリンケン国務長官をはじめとする多くの米国政府関係者から深甚なる哀悼の意を表明をいただきました。米国国民の皆様のお気持ちに心から感謝を申し上げます。先ほど、ブリンケン長官、レモンド長官および萩生田大臣とともに、初めての閣僚級経済版日米2+2を開催をいたしまして、大変充実した意見交換を行うことができました。両長官の素晴らしいホスピタリティに改めて感謝を申し上げます。経済版2+2は、外交安全保障と経済政策を一体として議論する日米同盟における初めての試みであります。その背景には、既存の国際秩序が力による一方的現状変更の試みのみならず、経済的な影響力を不公正、不透明に行使をし、自らの戦略的利益を実現しようとする試みによって、挑戦を受けていると、こうした日米の共通の危機感がございます。こうした危機に実効的に対処するために、本日、日米の4閣僚が両国の経済政策、地域の経済秩序の構築、そして経済安全保障などについて幅広く議論をすることができました。これはまさに時代の要請に応じたものであり、変動する国際経済の中での日米同盟の適応力と、そしてこの分野における国際連携をリードしていく、日米の決意を力強く発信をするものになったと考えております。本日は以下のような点について議論をし、日米の協力を確認をしたところでございます。まず第一に、ルールに基づく自由で開かれた国際経済秩序についてでございます。経済が外交に強い影響を与えている今日、経済のみならず戦略的観点から、国際秩序の維持発展と各国の経済安全保障の確保のために、日米が同志国とも協力していくことを確認をいたしました。特にエネルギー安全保障や食料安全保障に関して、ロシアのウクライナ侵略によって深刻な影響を受けている国への協力、これについても議論をいたしました。また私から両長官には、インド太平洋地域の経済秩序に米国がより積極的な役割を果たす観点から、IPEF への日本の支持と協力に加えて、米国の TPP への早期復帰への強い期待をお伝えをいたしました。第2に、国際社会の連帯や各国の外交政策を歪めるような意図的な経済的影響力の行使への対応について議論し、共通の認識を得たところでございます。 経済的圧は先般の G7 エルマウサミットでも取り上げられたところでございまして、来年の G7 広島サミットに向けても議論を深めていきたいと考えております。また、不公正、不透明な開発金融につきましても、すべての関係国が国際ルールやスタンダードを遵守するよう、日米で取り組んでいきたいと考えております。その他、日米自身が競争力と強靭性、これを確保するために、昨年4月に合意したコアパートナーシップに基づく協力をさらに推進していくこと、同志国間で協力をいたしまして、より強靭なサプライチェーン、これを構築をすること等について意見の一致を見ました。我々は保護主義やブロック経済を追求しているのではなくて、どのような政策も透明性やビジネスの予見可能性に留意するということを改めて強調いたしたいと思います。今後、来年、日本が議長国を務める G7、米国が議長国を務める APEC、こうした場も含めてですね、同志国とともにさまざまな関連分野での議論を深めてまいりたいと考えております。今後も閣僚会合を定期的に開催をしていくことで一致をいたしました。次回会合を楽しみにしております。私からは以上でございます。
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. And thank you to Secretary Blinken for hosting us, bringing us together. And thank you to Ministers Hagiuda and Hayashi for joining us and for being present here in the United States for this very important meeting. I also would like to join with Tony in expressing my condolences to our colleagues and to the people of Japan for the tragic loss of Prime Minister Abe. So I share the assessment with Secretary Blinken that today's meeting was a resounding success. We had candid, productive, open, substantive discussion, and I'm very proud of the joint progress on promoting economic growth, addressing threats to the global order, and enhancing security and resilience. The close ties between the United States and Japan support good jobs in both of our countries and contribute to our mutual prosperity and security. Our alliance is an increasingly important force for peace and prosperity, not only in the Indo-Pacific region, but in fact, throughout the world. I also want to acknowledge how deeply grateful I am that Congress yesterday finally approved funding for the CHIPS Act. As we discussed today, semiconductors are the linchpin of our economic and national security, and we had an excellent discussion today around how Japan and the United States could collaborate, especially with respect to advanced semiconductors. The $52 billion investment in the CHIPS Act in domestic semiconductor production will enable us to create hundreds of thousands of jobs in the United States, rebuild American manufacturing, and strengthen our supply chain for decades to come. Just as important, this funding will strengthen our partnerships with allies like Japan. It will enhance our joint work on supply chains, promote the competitiveness of both of our nations, and, importantly, make us less dependent on our adversaries for such a critical piece of technology. It will build on, just as importantly, the funding will strengthen our partnerships and will build on the meeting that Minister Hagiuda and I had in May, where we expressed shared intent for cooperation on semiconductor supply chains. I look forward to the day, not too far from now, where here in America we have American-made chips supplying Japanese auto plants here in the United States. Together, our two nations are leading the way in investing in our futures. So again, I just want to thank Minister Hagiuda and Minister Hayashi for joining us. Thank you for your efforts to forge new and stronger bonds between our nations, our communities, and our people.
経済産業大臣の萩生田光一です。私からも冒頭、アメリカ国民の皆様から安倍元総理へ寄せられた心のこもった弔意に対して御礼を申し上げたいと思います。日米同盟こそ日本外交の基軸である。安倍元総理は常々そう語っておりました。 オバマ元大統領との歴史的な広島と真珠湾への訪問には、当時、官房副長官として私も同行しましたが、安倍元総理は一貫して日米両国民の絆をさらに強固なものにするため、その政治生命を傾けてきました。この度、バイデン大統領には日本大使館まで弔問にお越しいただきました。ブリンケン国務長官には日本まで足を運んでいただき、レモンド商務長官からは心のこもったメッセージをいただきました。アメリカ国内では政府機関だけではなく、数多くの場所で半旗が掲げられたと聞いております。日米両国の国民レベルに及ぶ深い絆を示すものであり、安倍元総理に代わって深く御礼を申し上げます。Japan is back。ここワシントンで安倍元総理が宣言したのは10年ほど前のことです。日本が再び民主主義のチャンピオンたるアメリカと手を携えて、世界の平和と繁栄にリーダーシップを発揮する、その決意表明でした。そして CPTPP、自由で開かれたインド太平洋、クアッド、10年間で地域の平和と繁栄を支えるさまざまな基盤を築き上げてきました。ブリンケン国務長官は先日、大きな喪失感を感じているとおっしゃいました。率直に申し上げて、日本全体も大きな喪失感に覆われています。しかしながら、Japan is here to stay。これからも日本はアメリカと手を携え、世界の平和と繁栄のために力を尽くしていく、その明確な決意を申し上げるため、本日私はこの場所にやってまいりました。本日初めて開催された経済版2+2は、そのための枠組みです。サプライチェーンリスク、経済的威圧、外交・安全保障政策と経済政策は、もはや一体不可分です。そうした時代に日米の外務・経済の閣僚が膝詰めで議論を行い、一致したメッセージを世界に発信する、その意義は極めて大きいと考えます。デジタルなど新たな課題に対し、ルールに基づく新しい経済秩序を作り上げる、アメリカ政府のリーダーシップのもと、地域の多くの国々の参加を得て、IPEF による新たな経済秩序づくりが進んでいることを歓迎します。エネルギー安全保障、ビジネスと人権、情報通信など、信頼性の高いインフラの整備、蓄電池や重要鉱物など、サプライチェーンの強靭化、私たちにはやらなければならないことが山積しております。今回、共同声明を取りまとめると同時に、課題ごとの具体的な行動計画も発出できたのは大きな成果です。宇宙、海洋、サイバーなど、重要振興技術の分野でも協力を強化し、経済安全保障をしっかりと確保する、そのことも本日、かなりの時間を割いて、充実した議論を行いました。攻めと守りの両面から取り組んでいく、輸出管理による保護と合わせ、最先端の技術開発を推進してまいります。次世代半導体の日米共同開発を加速することでも、私たちは一致をしました。我が国は早速行動に移します。産総研、理研、東京大学など、次世代半導体研究における我が国の英知を結集し、新しい研究開発組織を立ち上げることを決定しました。海外の企業や研究機関にもオープンであり、国際共同研究のハブとする考えです。科学技術立国、日本の力を結集して、日米、さらには有志国の協力をリードしていく決意です。外交上の要求を通すために、経済的な力を国際ルールに反するような形で一方的に行使するようなことはあってはなりません。太平洋からインド洋へと至るこの広大な海と空は、自由で誰にでも開かれたものであり、国の大小にかかわらず、すべての国に恩恵をもたらすものでなければなりません。この経済版2+2は、いわば自由で開かれたインド太平洋の実現に向けた羅針盤、この地域に平和と繁栄をもたらす基盤となるものです。そのために、これからもここに並ぶレモンド商務長官、ブリンケン国務長官、林外務大臣と力を尽くしていく、そう決意をしております。私からは以上です。
We'll now turn to questions. We'll alternate two per side. We'll start with Sean Tandon of the AFP.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. Mr. Secretary, could I begin by following up on your remarks about your conversation with Foreign Minister Lavrov? How confident are you about this raising the chances of bringing home Brittany Griner and Paul Whelan? What is the sense that you got from Foreign Minister Lavrov? I know also you mentioned earlier this week that you're not planning to negotiate on Ukraine with the Russians, but what is the overall sense that you got from Foreign Minister Lavrov? Are you any more confident that the United States could be dealing with Russia and making progress in any area there? And do you plan to speak to him again or even meet him? As it was announced today, you're going to be in Cambodia next week for ASEAN. And perhaps if I could open up to everybody here a week of phone calls, I suppose. The phone call yesterday that the president had with President Xi of China, does this do you feel that this makes any progress on the issue of Taiwan? How concerned are you about the tensions in Taiwan right now and a potential visit by Speaker Pelosi? Do you think that, are you confident that's something you can work through, or are you worried about that aggravating the situation? Thank you very much.
Sean, thank you very much. First, just to put this in perspective, we said all along that if we thought there was any opportunity to advance diplomacy to end Russia's aggression against Ukraine, we would of course take it. Unfortunately, tragically, we've seen no opening, willingness on the part of Russia to engage meaningfully on ending the aggression. At the same time, I've also said that if there are issues where it could make a difference in senior Russians hearing directly from me or from colleagues, we would of course pursue that. And with regard to the call with the foreign minister today, as I noted the other day when we had an opportunity to speak, I told you what I intended to raise with him, and I raised exactly what I said I would raise with him. That is the significant proposal that's been on the table for some weeks now that would lead to bringing home Paul Whelan and Brittany Griner. I urged Foreign Minister Lavrov to move forward with that proposal. I'm not going to characterize his response, and I can't give you an assessment of whether I think things are any more or less likely, but it was important that he heard directly from me on that. Second, as I said the other day, on behalf of many, many countries around the world, getting Russia to move on the commitments it's made, not just to the United Nations, Turkey, and Ukraine in the context of the deal that was agreed, but to the entire world that is looking for an end to the blockade of the Odessa port by Russia that has denied so many people the food that they need and depend on, and has also resulted in a significant increase in food prices over many months. Important that he hear directly from me on behalf of many other countries the expectation that Russia would move forward with its commitments and would end the blockade and allow the ships to sail. And finally, you heard me say the other day the deep concern that many countries around the world have in hearing in recent days about Russia's expanded war aims in Ukraine, particularly their plans to proceed with the annexation of additional Ukrainian territory. And I laid out exactly what we anticipate they will do in the weeks and months ahead, including having sham referendums in these parts of Ukraine, trying to falsely demonstrate that the people in these parts of Ukraine somehow seek to become part of Russia, all to advance President Putin's objectives in gobbling up as much Ukrainian territory as he can, and from his perspective, trying to erase Ukraine as an independent sovereign country. That, of course, is not going to happen. The Ukrainian people have made clear that that's not going to happen, and the world has made clear they're not going to let that happen. But short of that, President is trying to grab as much Ukrainian territory as he can. And it was very important that the Russians hear directly from us that that will not be accepted. And not only will it not be accepted, it will result in additional significant costs being imposed upon Russia if it follows through on those plans. So I don't want to characterize any of Foreign Minister Lavrov's responses. If you have an opportunity to ask him, please proceed. With regard to the call between President Biden and President Xi, first, as you know, this followed previous discussions, including most recently in March, and it also builds on a number of recent engagements, including the time I spent with Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Bali, where we spent about 5 hours together. The National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, the Secretary of Defense, the Treasury Secretary, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, have each had recent conversations or engagements with their counterparts. And this is part of our effort to make sure that we maintain and deepen lines of communication with China, to responsibly manage the many differences that we have, and to work together wherever it is that our interests align. And that was very much the nature of the conversation. I can just say, again, it covered basically three things. Where our two countries can work together, with a particular focus on climate change, on health security, on counter-narcotics. Second, an exchange of views on Russia's aggression in Ukraine. And finally, Taiwan, where President Biden underscored that our policy has not changed. The United States strongly opposes any unilateral efforts to change the status quo or to undermine peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. So that was the nature and basically the substance of the conversation they had. They touched on a number of other issues. But look, I'll just say this in conclusion. We have many differences when it comes to Taiwan, but over the past 40-plus years, we have managed those differences and done it in a way that has preserved peace and stability and has allowed the people on Taiwan to flourish. It would be important as part of our shared responsibility to continue to manage this in a wise way that doesn't create the prospect for conflict. And keeping open lines of communication on this issue, especially between President Biden and President Xi, I think is vital to doing that. We believe direct communication between the leaders is the most essential aspect of meeting our responsibilities to manage issues as fraught as Taiwan in the most responsible way possible.
では2問目は日本のプレスの方から、共同通信の松浦さん、どうぞ。
質問の機会をありがとうございます。共同通信の松浦です。林大臣とブリンケン長官にお伺いします。日米の歩みを振り返りますと、安全保障の2+2が閣僚レベルに格上げされたのは1990年でした。本日2+2は経済分野に拡大され、日米同盟が新たなステージに入ったと言えます。一方、中国は国際社会で経済力をてこに影響力の拡大を図る動きを広げています。まず、日米が結束して経済秩序の維持強化を目指す意義についてお尋ねします。その上で、今回の会合を G7 や中国と経済的結びつきが強い ASEAN との議論にどのように生かしていかれたいか、お考えを伺います。
はい、まず日米両国はですね、これまでも国際社会における力による一方的な現状変更の試み、これを許さないように連帯、協力をしてまいったところでございます。一方で冒頭述べたように、日米が経済的な影響力の不公正、不透明な行使に実務的にですね、対処するためには、外交安全保障と、そして経済を一体として考慮すると、こういうことが必要になってきております。特に世界で第1位と第2位の民主主義経済であります日米が、こうした情勢においてですね、取るべき政策について戦略的に議論すると、そういうことが有益であると考えております。そういった意味で経済版2+2は、そのような時代の要請に応えるものであり、日米同盟が国際情勢の変動に適応できるということを示したと言っていいと思います。 両政府は本日の経済版2+2での議論を踏まえて、今後、両国間でさまざまな協力を推進するとともに、インド太平洋地域をはじめとする国際社会の秩序の維持・発展に努めてまいりたいと思っております。また、国際経済秩序の形成には、この日米の2国間にとどまらず、同志国との協力が不可欠でありまして、来年、日本が議長を務める G7 においても、本日の経済版の2+2、ここで議論したですね、問題意識や戦略的協力、これを G7 各国とも共有し、より広い協力につなげていきたいと思っております。そういった意味でも ASEAN との関係においてですね、日米は ASEAN 一体性、中心性、これを尊重しながら、自由で開かれたインド太平洋と、それからこれは ASEAN が出しましたインド太平洋に関する ASEAN アウトルック、この実現に向けた具体的な協力を進めてきておりまして、引き続き今回の経済版2+2で議論したインド太平洋地域の持続可能で包摂的な経済成長の実現や、この経済安全保障の確保、こういったことを念頭にですね、米国による IPEF 等の枠組み、これを活用し、地域のパートナー国と緊密に協力をしていきたいと考えております。
I agree with everything that my colleague has said. I would simply add a couple of points or reinforce a couple of points. First, the United States and Japan share a conviction that economic security and national security are inseparable. They are fundamentally linked. And I think it was very important to both of us and all of our colleagues to further elevate the discussions we're having on economic security issues because they're really front and center on our agenda and on the world's agenda. And the issues that you heard us talk about today, I think really go to, in many ways, very practical things that our people in Japan, in the United States, and beyond are feeling, experiencing in their lives. And we have a shared conviction that working together, we can make a genuine difference in advancing opportunity and dealing with challenges to the well-being of our people in the economic sphere. So that's the most important thing. Second, I would simply say that many of the initiatives that we're engaged in together, whether it's between the United States and Japan, whether it's in the context of ASEAN, IPEF, the Quad, these are mutually reinforcing. And they, in effect, add strength to each other. And I think we saw that today because many of the things that we talked about overlap with issues that are on the agenda of IPEF, the Quad, et cetera. When the United States and Japan can work together to help drive some of these issues, and next year, as you know, Japan will be in the lead of the G7. We will be in the lead of APEC. We can make a big difference in actually moving forward. Last thing is this. We get to stand up here and share with all of you the results of our meeting. The truth of the matter is there are a number of people who are sitting with us today and others who are back in their ministries in Tokyo and here in Washington who really drive the work every single day. So we've agreed that we will meet again among the four of us next year, but in between then, we've laid out a very detailed and concrete agenda for our teams to follow up on between now and the end of the year and then into next year, so that not only have we set out a basic vision together and framework for the work that our countries can do, we'll actually follow up with concrete initiatives to make all of this real. So I think that's the other importance of today, an agreement that we're really going to drive this forward together over the next months.
Joel Gerke, Washington Examiner.
Hi, thank you for doing this. Mr. Foreign Minister, I wonder, starting on Taiwan, is the Japanese government making any contingency planning from a security perspective for a potential crisis in the near term, whether that would be prompted by a visit from Speaker Pelosi or some other visit? And does the Japanese government envision a role for the G7 to intervene with any economic leverage to deter or mitigate the risk of escalation in such a crisis? Secretary Raimondo, you've spoken before about the Russian military being forced to strip semiconductors from kitchen appliances in Ukraine. Do you have any sense of whether those supply constraints that they have are imposing a time limit on their military operations there? And more generally, do you see that being applicable with respect to China in a crisis, or even on the other foot? Does the U.S. have sufficient semiconductor supplies to see through a Taiwan crisis in the near term? And then Secretary Blinken, the USS Ronald Reagan Carrier Strike Group is in the South China Sea, but there's been a lot of ink spilt on the vulnerability of the surface fleet if there were a crisis with China. Are you having any conversations about near-term pre-positioning of defense assets and, with Japan or other allies in the region next week? Thank you.
はい、ありがとうございます。まずペロシ議長の外遊につきましては、日本政府としてコメントする立場にはないと考えております。そして、この日米間においてはですね、今年の5月の日米首脳共同声明におきまして、台湾に関する両国の基本的な立場に変更はなく、国際社会の安全と繁栄に不可欠な要素である台湾海峡、この平和と安定は重要であるということを強調し、両岸問題の平和的解決を促すことについて、一致をしてきているところでございます。
Thank you. With respect to the export controls, we have reason to believe that with each passing week and month, the export controls have an even more devastating effect on Russia's ability to continue this war. As they develop the stockpile in preparation for the war for these sorts of technology and spare parts, as that continues to dwindle, their ability to continue to operate is reduced significantly. I will say the reason that these export controls are having such an effect is because we're doing them in coordination with our allies, first among them the Japanese. I mean, this isn't the United States acting alone. We have a coalition of 36 countries. Japan stepped up immediately, and together we are denying Russia parts, including semiconductors, and importantly, as we discussed today, collaborating on enforcement. And we will continue to collaborate on enforcement to continue to deny Russia what it needs to continue this war. With respect to the United States, I have no concern that we have an ability to meet our needs. And furthermore, the fact that Congress acted yesterday on the CHIPS Act is an enormous step forward to ensure that we'll be able to protect ourselves and our allies and have adequate semiconductor supplies for decades to come.
And with regard to any contingencies and any preparations made on a military level, I defer to the Pentagon.
それでは読売新聞の下里さんどうぞ。
読売新聞の下里と申します。萩生田大臣、レモンド長官の順にお答えいただければ幸いです。日米は本来経済的には競争関係にあるかと思いますが、半導体などをめぐって摩擦になった歴史もあります。現在同盟関係が経済分野まで広がっていることの所感をまずお願いいたします。また関連いたしまして半導体のサプライチェーンの強化に向けて今後どのように政策を進めていかれますでしょうか。半導体分野で日米協力を具体的にどう深めていきますか。半導体に関する枠組みを今後この日米以外にどのように広げていくかの視点もお願いいたします。冒頭のご発言と重なる部分もあるかと思いますが、よろしくお願いいたします。
はい、ありがとうございます。競争というのはそれが自由で公正なルールに基づいて行われている限り、経済成長活力の源泉にもなります。そうした中で我々は世界第1位、第3位の経済大国となりました。これからも日米が切磋琢磨しながら、共に競争力を高め、成長していくことは重要と考えています。他方、近年問題になっているのは、自由で公正なルール、経済秩序自体を脅かしかねない行為であります。例えば、サプライチェーンの上の優位性を自らの影響力行使のために利用するようなことは認められません。国際ルールに反する経済的な威圧も容認はできません。 こうした課題に対しては、まさに自由や民主主義、基本的人権、法の支配といった普遍的価値を共有する日米が協力して、ルールに基づく経済秩序を守らなければならないと思っております。しっかりと競争ができるレベルプレイングフィールドを作っていくことで、地域の平和と繁栄の基盤を作ることは、日米両国の大きな責任だと思います。将来の産業競争力を左右する次世代半導体技術の開発は、日米協力の最重要分野でありまして、協力のさらなる加速に向けて、5月の首脳会談で合意をした次世代半導体研究開発のためのジョイントタスクフォースを早速先月開催をいたしました。レモンド商務長官との間で合意した半導体協力基本原則に基づき、志を同じくするパートナーと協力拡大の重要性を再確認した上で、2020年代の次世代半導体の実現に向けた研究開発、人材育成、サプライチェーンの強靭化などの協力を具体化していくことで合意をしました。我が国としては、この共同研究実施を見据え、先ほども申し上げましたが、産総研や理研、東大などとですね、次世代半導体研究における国内の英知を結集して、新しい研究開発組織を立ち上げることを決定しました。海外の企業や研究機関にもオープンにしてまいりたいと思いますので、日米協力をはじめ、有志国地域も含めて国際共同研究のハブとしていきたいと思いますし、まさにこの会談の前にですね、レモンド商務長官のご努力によって、米国側の半導体の新たな法律ができました。ここにも日本政府としても、日本企業としてもコミットしていく道をですね、早速検討してみたいと思っています。
Yeah, I agree. That was extremely well said by my colleague. I concur with everything he said. I would simply underscore 2 points. One, in the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which we have launched, and with Japan and a dozen other economies in the Indo-Pacific, there is a pillar focused on supply chains. And we expect that a core piece of work in the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework in supply chains will be focused on semiconductors, aligning research and development, coordinating on export controls, working together. Secondly, after the passage of the CHIPS Act, our goal now, the Department of Commerce will be implementing the CHIPS Act with the goal of rebuilding the entire semiconductor supply chain in America. And we welcome Japanese foreign direct investment into the United States as we develop that supply chain, specifically in the areas of chemicals and substrates, materials. The Japanese are world leaders. Tooling, and we look forward to, and as the minister said, research and development and emerging technology. It's impossible to overstate the significance of Congress's action yesterday and the opportunity for collaboration that opens for the United States and Japan to strengthen the semiconductor supply chain.
That concludes the press conference. Thank you, Your Excellencies. Thank you, everyone.